I've got Matt here from Kroll, and Matt, we are addressing the challenges of commercial rebuild values. So, to start us off, I've got some questions lined up. How does Kroll help risk managers and insurers with commercial rebuild costs?
Yeah, thanks for being here, Cleo, and I appreciate you coming out and doing this with us, even though you're not a client yet.
I just got that in there, sorry.
I do see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd, but for those of you who don't know who Kroll is, we're a global provider of risk and financial advisory services, and you might know us by one of our predecessor companies, being American Appraisal or Duff & Phelps, or from our energy team that we just brought over from AVC. But the fixed asset team that I work with and that I lead in the UK and Amsterdam, we help our clients through providing online and traditional valuations. So the traditional valuations, we have different service levels and different tiers. So from the simplest desktop valuation up to more of a everyday walkthrough valuation, and then our highest level of service being a detailed gold standard of listing and pricing all the major assets, and companies might need that for post-loss support or for EML calculations, but we recognize that not every company has a one-size-fits-all need, so we've tried to structure our service lines, our service levels to match that. On the other side, we have our online valuations. So we've recently built and spoke about here at one of the other Instech events, our Kroll valuation platform. Allison rightly pointed out that not everybody wants a new platform, so we've also built that together with the guys at Aurora Insurance into an API. So if you have an existing platform, you can just plug that in, and what it does is we feed data through an algorithm that produces an automated valuation for any building of less than 50 million pounds. So, together with those two sources of services, that's how we're helping risk managers and insurers.
Great. No spreadsheets mentioned there either at the moment.
I'll get to those.
So I think we're going to do a poll now.
Yes.
Oh, good. Is that there? So the question is, how often should valuations be refreshed? So we've got annually, every 3 years, every 5 years, 7 years, and not sure. So I think every 3 years, seems to be the majority. And so with that in mind, we've seen inflation being a massive concern over the last few years. How does Kroll take that into account, and does it influence how often people have their valuations done?
Yeah, it's an interesting result to see. We used to hear from the market and from clients that they were only interested, if ever, doing a valuation every 5 to 7 years. In the past, we'd have to knock on doors and say, hey, you haven't had a valuation done in 15 years. Are you interested in one now? But now it seems we've become more popular because nobody can ignore inflation anymore. And we do see clients more and more interested in these programs that run every 3 to 5 years, or they use us for cost monitoring services where we update values annually through indexation and looking at current rates. What we do at Kroll actually is pretty cool and brings the Instech, the tech side to the conversation, is we've written scripts that track over 40 different sources of producer price indexes and construction cost indexes that are either geography, asset, or industry specific. And we log those into a database that's accessible by everybody in the firm, or everybody in our group at least. And these things track the change in price for equipment and construction over time. On top of that, we look at over 25 different sources of construction costs that we also put into our database and we update regularly. And couple that with having 200 appraisers around the world doing over 10,000 engagements a year, we've got a pretty good feel for how inflation is impacting our values. And so we like to recommend to our clients, yes, these 3 to 5 year cycles with the interim indexation, or at a minimum, the cost monitoring that we can help with every year. But hopefully the days of 5 to 7 or never are behind us. So now I have a question for you. What's important to you when looking for a data provider that you'll use to help procure insurance coverage? And before I let you answer, I think we're going to ask the crowd what they think with a poll. Seems like overwhelmingly the response is quality, followed by a bit of a tie between price and delivery time. What are your thoughts on that?
So Sorry, I forgot I have a microphone. So yeah, quality first and foremost for me, because there's no point in having a report or data delivered really quickly and it not being able to rely on it because it's not accurate. So absolutely quality. I think also the consistency of approach. At Landsec, we're a developer and a real estate owner. So our bread and butter is in our building. So it's super important that we get that right. The compatibility with the team as well is about understanding my priorities, my requirements, because I need to justify these values to all my key stakeholders, really.
Good lead into the next question.
Right. So, oh yeah, and so I was thinking about this before, and I mentioned this when we caught up before, Matt, and it was about how do you make a risk manager or insurer comfortable with Kroll's rebuild cost methodology? And you did talk a lot about the different systems you've got, so just a bit more on, if there's been any issues with that.
Yeah, no issues. Methodology-wise, what we do is industry standard in the market. It's tried and tested. It's endorsed by AXA Insurance, who's a partner of ours, and some of the biggest manufacturers in the world in the UK. I'm a big believer in having an open line of communication with the client throughout the whole process. And the key is to make sure they know any questions or concerns they have are being addressed or looked into by us. Being able to provide transparent and detailed explanations for the value drivers and the things that are impacting the results is also key. And demonstrating the thoroughness of what we do and everything that goes into it, I think, is also goes a long way in instilling confidence in the risk managers.
Great. So what happens if a client does think that a valuation is too high or too low?
Well, I've done this long enough to know not to take it personally anymore. But this does happen from time to time. And the first thing we want to understand is just why. Why do you think that? What evidence do you have to support maybe a higher or lower value? And then, of course, we like to go back and check our assumptions and our inputs. Oftentimes, we're reliant on data that's been provided to us that we try to validate to the extent possible. And sometimes there's gaps in that data that we have to make assumptions on. So if new information comes available, we're always open to having a look at it. But it is pretty incredible, the ability for information that was previously unavailable to miraculously appear once results have been delivered. I think it just happens that the guy who was responsible for collecting it maybe didn't realize the importance of it until his manager or somebody else above him said, hey, our premiums are going through the roof, or maybe your CapEx budget is being slashed as a result of these low values. More often than not, though, we offer a reasonable explanation for where we're coming out.
Cool. Sorry, that was me, a hint. He was going to ask me a question.
So, what are some of your biggest concerns around property rebuild costs over the next few years?
So, I suppose accessibility to suppliers and materials. Supply chain risk is a key factor when developing buildings, and it was mentioned earlier on about the supply chain. We've seen so many companies going into administration, liquidation over the last few years that it's a huge concern. And then not just rebuild costs, but what impacts the whole reinstatement is actually how long it takes. So, the accessibility piece then goes on to the DSU, but also, we're a real estate owner, so our income is in from our rent. So the longer that building is down, the longer we go without rent and the higher our business interruption claim comes. So that's a key factor. And then also, I think where we are really trying to build more sustainable, we're looking at the modern methods of construction, we're looking at building different ways in using different technologies, using different materials like cross-laminated timber, low carbon concrete. So I think it's making sure all of those are considered when we look at the rebuild costs, but also the time that it takes to rebuild. And picking up on the supply chain comment, how do you see the supply chain issues impacting on commercial rebuild costs?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you touched on it in your response a bit, but we've been seeing this, it feels like nonstop, right? Whether it's COVID shutting down factories, or the blockage of the Suez Canal, or global conflict and the war in Ukraine. These disruptions in the supply chain are just causing delays in the delivery of materials and components. And simple economics, if there's a shortage of supply and not an corresponding decrease in demand, you're going to have prices go up. So, we also see these delays that are extending the timeline of a project, causing labor costs to go up or expenses due to labor to increase correspondingly. But all in all, it's definitely creating a higher cost environment.
And have you seen a lot of people coming back to you over trying to forecast?
We do from time to time. It's not every engagement, but a lot of clients are more interested now in rebuild times than they used to be. A lot of times in the past, we could give a simple range of whether it was 6 to 12 months for a basic component or a year to 2 for a more complex piece of kit. But it's not something that we always touch on, but it's something that we can offer in addition to the values when asked. And lastly, how can data providers better support risk managers in the future? What can we do to help you guys?
Well, I think you've touched upon all the different platforms that you have, depending on the requirements of the customer. And I think I always say about, it's about understanding your client. It's really getting to know what are their key objectives, their requirements. And it's about challenging them. We make certain assumptions, I think, as insurers, risk managers, and actually we are guided by your expertise, your experience. So whilst there's a generalised approach we might take, I think it needs to be really key, depending on your industry, the culture of your organisation, what those ultimate goals are you're trying to achieve. But also, and talking about Ali and her spreadsheets and data capture and systems, you've got some obviously very sophisticated software that you use. But so it's about making that available in whatever format we need it. It's about maximising efficiencies as well, so that we're not replicating data over and over again. And actually, when we get that, how we get that data, again, Ali, you talked about the security of information. How do we get that to share with insurers? And I think it's just, putting yourselves in our shoes, and what would you want to provide to us if you were sat in our seat, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I do love a good spreadsheet, I'm not going to lie, but my favorite part of the job is the client-facing component and delivering the quality and trying to understand what it is that you most need, instead of just, like I said, trying to deliver a one-size-fits-all product.
Yeah. Okay, and we have got time for a question or two if anyone has any. Yes, Ali? So Ali just wants to know, actually, what consideration can Kroll give when we're looking to not just reinstate what was there, but using different materials, say concrete into timber? How can we use the valuations process to reflect that?
Yeah, so we can model all sorts of scenarios, so it doesn't have to be an exact replica. And really, if you've got sign-off from your insurers or the captive, whoever it is that ultimately signs off on the coverage, then that's between you and them, and we'll give you a valuation for whatever scenario you're looking for. And I think we're going to start to see this more and more. And so we need to brush up on what are the costs of these green technologies, what are the costs of these green components, what is that impact marginally on what the normal cost would have been day one as is. But yeah, that's definitely something that we could model. We have all kinds of data on what's the difference in the cost of different frame types, different wall types, whether it's different heating equipment. I think we're going to find out more and more very soon.
Great. If there's no other questions, I've got the timer going red in front of me. So we're going to head off to a break now, 30 minutes. If you can come back then, that would be great for the next session. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Cleo.
Thanks, Matt.